Caesar's adopted son. Octavia was most unhappy about her brother Octavius. Seated with the family in the garden pergola, where the dappling shade of a rose trellis fell on her brown hair, she was trying to sew. She had hoped that morning to hem the crimson border on a toga she was making for her husband, Marsilius. But she could hardly thread a needle. She was so worried about her brother. He was determined to face the danger. Nothing could say seemed to have any effect upon him. The family had been at Puteoli, this summer villa on the Bay of Naples, ever since they had hurried out of Rome after the fearful Ides of March. It was now about the 20th of April. Octavius had arrived a day or so before and had shocked them with all the announcement that he intended to go right on to Rome and carry out the terms of Julius Caesar's will. Though their mother and stepfather kept telling him how dangerous and foolhardy it would be, Octavius reminded him firm in his purpose. He was determined to claim his inheritance and to register himself under the new name of Caesar, Julius Caesar Octavian. The soldiers, he said, were already calling him Caesar. At the port of Brundusium, the legions waiting to be shipped east on the great campaign had given him a wonderful welcome and had hailed him as their new commander-in-chief, the Imperator. "Commander-in-chief of Caesar's legions?" exclaimed his mother. "You are too young. You have almost no military experience." "Nor any experience in politics," added the stepfather. "You have never held office and have no power among the people." "Money buys power," said Octavius. "With my inheritance, I could celebrate victories, games in Caesar's honors, and pay the 300 sesterces, which would be $15, which he was so generally left in his will, to every citizen of Rome. That would certainly give me a following." At these words, spoken so surprisingly like man, Octavia sent her young brother a swift smile of pride, but her stepfather shook his head in grave misgiving. He said that it would be impossible for Octavius to obtain the money from Mark Antony. "In his will, Caesar made you heir and his adopted son. That's true," he said. "But Antony, who was his friend and consul with him this past year, took over Caesar's money the day that he was killed. Also all of his papers and records, and since then has been running affairs in Rome with a high hand." Octavius was listening without a word, so his stepfather went on. "As for the soldiers, Antony is a popular general, the best in Rome, now that Caesar is dead. Those legions at Brundusium may go over to him when they find him in Caesar's palace." To this, Octavius replied that the legions were loyal to Caesar. They wanted revenge on the men who had murdered him. They would never follow Antony when they found out that he had come to temporary terms with the conspirators and allowed even the ringleaders, Cassius and Brutus, to leave Rome. "Brutus? That Brutus?" Octavia repeated that name with sadness in her gentle voice. To think that Brutus, who always seemed so noble and good, should have taken part in this dreadful plot. And Caesar was so fond of him. No wonder he was shocked when Brutus stabbed him. "Brutus was what he said, and you too, Brutus." Octavia sighed, and a tear dropped on the crimson border as she turned back to her sewing. The four fell into silence. Octavius stood beside a marble bench, looking out toward the blue water in the direction of Pompeii, another royal summer resort, which a little over 100 years later the old volcano Vesuvius was born both to ruin and preserve. "You are determined, then, to go to Rome," said his mother finally, seeing her son's small mouth set in a firm line. Octavius nodded. "Then," said his stepfather, "there is nothing further to be said, except that it might be well before you leave to see our old friend Cesario. The old gentleman is here now in Puteoli at his villa, writing and giving the two consuls elected for the next year lessons in public speaking. It is true that Cesario considered her his uncle Julius Caesar a tyrant, and believed that by killing him, Brutus and those ordered others rendered a service to the state. Yet on the other hand, he loathes and despises Antony. So, if he thought it would be lessen Antony's powers, Caesario might be persuaded to help you. So, either that day or the next, Octavius went to call on Caesario, the old Roman orator, who, as it happened, had made his most famous oration the year Octavius was born.